Good morning. Good morning. Happy Monday, everybody out there. This is your Monday morning lawyer, Attorney Jobeth Bowers. That's right, your accident and injury guy, coming at you live from my office here in Elkton, Maryland. And I hope that you're enjoying this. This is the, I think, fourth week that we have done this live stream here. We're getting good feedback, and we're also starting to get questions from you guys about various topics in the law, some of which, if they relate to my primary field of practice here, accidents and injuries, obviously I will address them. But as you see, today we have a special guest today with some topics that really stem from some stuff people have been seeing out there in the internet, and we'll get to the topic for today momentarily. Just as I like to kind of start these things off with something that's going on locally and in the community, I want to let anybody that is in the area, obviously I understand these things can be watched from anywhere at any time, but anybody that's here in or near Elkton, my little picture there is not huge, but I want to let everybody know that, as is normal, next week, celebrating Cinco de Mayo, downtown Elkton does the fun little thing where they shut down the streets. So you're not going to be able to drive through. I think that's Friday evening. There's a bunch of stuff that's going to be fun and happening on the streets to celebrate Cinco de Mayo. I believe that, and I don't have all of the details, but that might even run some of this stuff into Saturday. I know last year there were a bunch of street vendors there, music. Obviously, the rules on adult beverages and open containers in the street are a little relaxed for festivities like that. So if that is your sort of thing, whether or not it includes the adult beverages in an outdoor setting, go check that out. Obviously, food and beverage that you purchase and stuff from vendors has its cost to it, but otherwise the event itself, being able to mix, mingle, and have a good time in downtown Elkton is free. So those events are normally family friendly and geared toward that. So hopefully we see you out there downtown Elkton on the 3rd, celebrating Cinco de Mayo. So without further ado, I want to introduce my colleague, my friend, somebody who I still work together with on a number of cases, Attorney Frank Natale. Good morning, Frank. How are you?
I'm well, Jobeth. Good morning to you.
So I've gotten a lot of questions since starting this podcast, and really before starting the podcast, we would get questions about cases that you are now, as I like to call it, on special assignment for. You are doing a lot of heavy lifting for some what have now become fairly high profile cases, not the least of which involving sexual abuse from various institutions, one of them being the Archdiocese in and around the area of Baltimore, and some involving other detentional type of facilities. You tell me a little bit more about what we're dealing with here in a nutshell.
First off, thank you for having me on your show today. It's great that this format exists, and thanks for all your viewers taking a listen to this. And it's an important topic. I love that designation you gave me. I think it's there's a lot of undercurrent to that, and it's an interesting thing that we'll discuss offline at some point in time. But I do feel it's a special assignment. So thank you for that designation. You always bring a smile to my face with your your wit and wisdom. So thank you for that. But just jumping into the topic, first of all, just a little bit of educational piece for everybody that's listening. In 2023, the state of Maryland passed what's known as the Child Victims Act. It is its newest iteration of the Child Victims Act. There were Child Victims Acts that existed prior to 2023. Each of those put a time limit. The previous ones put a time limit within which somebody would have to file their claim for negligence against an entity that allowed sexual abuse to occur. I believe the first one that was passed was in 2003, which extended Maryland's already statute of limitations of 3 years for negligence to 7 years. And then in 2017, there was another act that was passed that extended it to 20 years. And now in 2023, the state of Maryland did what we believe was necessary. And as science and social understanding of these issues has evolved, they've taken that cap off, meaning that anybody that was a child victim of sexual abuse that is a survivor, meaning that they are still alive today, they can bring a claim at any time. There is no statute of limitations. So again, we believe this was the right step because society and science and medicine have evolved to the point where we understand victims of sexual abuse, especially when this occurred as a minor. It's tough for them to deal with those issues. It's tough for them to come out and speak about those issues. There's no magic age at which they become comfortable with bringing these issues forward. Sometimes those memories are repressed and forgotten out of a survival mode that people go through. So we're just thankful to the Maryland State Legislature for opening up this cap, for recognizing science and medicine and societal norms to allow folks to bring these claims in their own time. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that's evolved and where we are in today's world here in Maryland as we go along. But yeah, that's the backdrop. And I'd love to talk a little bit more in detail about some of the specific entities that we realize need to be accountable for allowing sexual abuse to occur throughout the years. Jobeth, mainly the one that comes to mind immediately is the Archdiocese of Baltimore, as you mentioned. The Archdiocese of Baltimore has recognized that abuse occurred in their churches and parishes. In fact, they have a list that they maintain of known abusers. They have a list of the churches that those known abusers worked for and the time periods that they worked for them. And I think you may make available to your viewers at some point in time a link which shows those abusers' names and those churches. So that Jobeth will probably post that for you on his YouTube channel so that you can take a look at that. But
yeah, we'll make sure that those kind of pertinent resources end up showing up in the. I don't know if I'll be able to do it on the Facebook stream, but certainly on the YouTube. As that, if you navigate to the podcast tab, not only will you be able to see any and all of the old episodes, but the episode description will be able to go in after the fact and actually edit that. So we'll make sure those resources show up there. That way, if you have a question about you or a family member, friend, or loved one possibly being qualified in one of these situations, which I would imagine, as you've already mentioned, it's a little bit of a different situation because of the psychological elements to the abuse. I don't want to oversimplify what it is that I do primarily, but when you get in an auto accident, you were in an auto accident. And a lot of our clients act very quickly on getting guidance for that. When you're dealing with any sort of psychological abuse, whether it be sexual or otherwise, there's an inherent kind of, especially with, like you said, with children, with minors, there sometimes lacks that understanding initially that, hey, something wrong is happening here right now. So I think, obviously that I have not closely watched how the sausage is made, so to speak, on the legislature getting this to fruition and extending this. But I do know that, from various dealings that our office has with the Maryland Crime Victims Advocacy Group and other groups, that it's a very difficult, it's a difficult situation for anybody to deal with. So, yeah.
It absolutely is. And you've hit the nail on the head. Sometimes we've heard from folks that we represent that, when they were a child, they didn't know that it was wrong, especially when they were abused by an authority figure, a priest or somebody as an authority figure in a church or within a school. They were led to believe that it was okay. And, they looked up to that person, and also their family may have looked up to that person. So, it's very difficult for them to have understood what was happening was wrong and to come to terms with that. And then there's a lot of guilt and shame, which is misplaced, obviously. But, the fact of the matter is that's what folks have to deal with and have to, come to terms with that for a lot of reasons before they can come forward. Right now, one of the most important things for us to convey to your audience is the Archdiocese of Baltimore filed a bankruptcy case because prior to this act that I've talked about going into effect, it went into effect October 1 of 2023. So just about 7 months ago. Just before it went into effect in late September, the Archdiocese of Baltimore filed bankruptcy because they anticipated that there would be a large volume of claims filed against them, lawsuits filed against their parishes, their churches, their schools, and the entity itself. So in order to basically deal with that large volume of claims and then still function and come out on the other side of it, they filed a Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The details of that we don't really have to go into today, and I'm happy to answer those questions if somebody wants to call me privately. But the point being for today's purpose is folks who want to make a claim for abuse that occurred while they were a member of a church, a school, a parish, because that bankruptcy process is in effect right now, the bankruptcy court has its own deadlines. And an upcoming deadline to make a claim for people who are abused, survivors of abuse, is May 31st of this year. So we're coming up on less than 2 months before you have to put your claim in. That's a very important date. May 31st is what's called a bar date. If you don't make a claim against the church in this bankruptcy, against the Archdiocese of Baltimore, before May 31st, you could have your claims lost forever based upon the bar date. So this is separate and apart from the statute of limitations that I discussed earlier. It is because the bankruptcy court has set its own bar date for making claims. And I'll just say one last piece before I throw it back to you, Jobeth, on this. Bankruptcy is a process by which creditors can make claims. People who are victims of abuse who have lawsuits or possible lawsuits, negligence suits against those entities are considered creditors. And as such, they have a date by which they have to make their claim. And that claim must be filed by May 31st. We do handle those claims, and it's a fairly simple process to get the claim perfected before May 31st, but you have to act on it and you have to get it done before then. So,
and just for clarity, the bankruptcy and everything that you're talking about, this is specific to the Baltimore Archdiocese cases. Unfortunately, you're handling some similar claims against other entities here in Maryland.
That's right. The largest of those, pretty much, I would say, a larger volume of people were affected by the juvenile detention centers in the state of Maryland. And again, the state of Maryland has recognized and understands that there was widespread, I would characterize it as widespread abuse of folks who were housed in juvenile detention centers that were run by the state of Maryland. And as such, we are representing a large volume of folks, along with a couple other firms in the state of Maryland, actually nationally, who are representing folks who were housed in juvenile detention centers and were abused. You'd be surprised, I think, maybe not surprised, Jobeth, but maybe some of your viewers would be surprised that some of the same abusers at these facilities had their opportunity to abuse multiple victims over multiple years. And we've heard their name mentioned over and over again from our clients. Thankfully, the state of Maryland not only is recognizing that this needs to be remedied for the individuals who are abused, but they're also going after those individuals who are the abusers, and rightly so.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate because a lot of times I would imagine, from my understanding, a lot of the folks that end up in those, juvenile detention, schooling type of facilities are there because primarily from their behavior in the world and in school and otherwise, but a lot of that stems in various situations from abuse at home. So you're talking about victims there that have had many times endured a great deal of abuse, some from day one of their lives all the way through, an education system that put them in a place that it just ended up not being safe for them. What are some of the top offenders, I guess, here in Maryland that you end up dealing with? The facilities, not individuals.
Sure. No, absolutely. Thanks for being sensitive to that. Definitely. The names that keep coming up from a facility standpoint are the Hickey Center, Baltimore Center, Juvenile Justice Center, Cheltenham, the Cheltenham facility, Thomas Waxter facility, The facilities on the Eastern Shore, there are a couple of those that come up regularly. There's about 18 facilities. Some of them aren't named quite as much by our clients, or the clients aren't seeking us out from those facilities yet. But I would say we probably have 200 people who have contacted us about the Hickey Center. Yeah, and Waxter is another one. It's pretty much, close behind that. So it wouldn't be surprising, to hear across the state of Maryland that there may be approaching 2,000 people who were abused within juvenile detention centers.
That's unfortunate, but obviously glad that you're here and the firm that you're working with is taking these things on. Now, with those, there's not they're kind of qualified under that same the statute of limitations is relaxed, and they're not subject to obviously the bankruptcy that you talked about, because that's specific to the Archdiocese. But what types of things, and again, I don't want to get too personal. I don't want to have to issue a trigger warning on this episode, but when somebody's contacting about making one of these claims, somebody that thinks that they or knows that they were victimized and is just now ready to talk to somebody about it, what are some of the types of things that they might need to have ready to discuss with you before making that call?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad you brought it up, Jobeth. And having the space to talk about these kind of things in this format is really important. When we talk about this, I'm sure that there are folks out there that this is gonna land with. They're gonna say that's me, and I understand what they're talking about when they say these things. First off, I just want to go back to one thing you said a little bit earlier. When folks were put into juvenile detention centers as kids, sure, there were some times where people committed some offense and they were mandated to be housed in those facilities. Other times, what happened was just unfortunate. And when somebody comes through that process and is victimized while they're in that facility or those facilities, it doesn't just, and you and I have talked about this before in our auto cases that we've handled, or other types of cases we've handled at trial. And the person's life didn't start at the time of their accident. The person's life didn't start at the time of the trauma that they endured in that juvenile detention facility. They had a life before that. And maybe that life was filled with trauma already. Maybe that life wasn't, the best life for them leading up to that time. But, to compound that with the trauma that they endured in the juvenile detention center, really, it just creates this significant problem that is hard to unwind and really hard to deal with. And to come to us at this point in time and to go back through speaking about that trauma and their life leading up to that trauma, it's difficult. And I would just recommend that folks, understand that we're here to listen. We're not here to judge anything about what you say. There is a process in law firms, and you can really relate to this, Jobeth. There's what we call intake. Somebody calls in and the attorney doesn't answer the phone. It's somebody that has to listen to the concern that you have as a client, but they have to take down enough information to pass it along to an attorney that's going to then set up the time to go over your case and meet with you. And really, it's an unfortunate part of the process that I don't think there's any way around, but that you might have to repeat your story a couple times. And we really do recognize that is, re-traumatizing you. And unfortunately, there is really not any way around that, but we want to minimize that as much as possible and understand that we are here to listen to you. We're here to give you the space that you need to talk about it in the space and time that you're ready to talk about it. We'll do that virtually with you. We'll do that in person with you. And we do understand that it's difficult. So I would say the biggest thing to come prepared with is just understanding that we're here to listen, but understanding that we have to hear your story to be able to help you. Oftentimes there's not really documentation or anything that you're going to provide to us. You may have, let's say you're an AOB case, an Archdiocese of Baltimore case. You may have your communion confirmation, something that shows you were at that church at that time. You may have those documents. It's not necessary to bring them, but if you have those and you want to show them to us, that's great. We will definitely utilize those to help support your case. You may have photographs from your time at church or at any particular facility or school, one of the church schools. If it's a juvenile detention center case, you may have the name of the person who was the abuser or the abusers, and that's helpful, or a description of them. But it's just being able to recount your story and having the patience and ability to be able to do that. So understanding that we're here to listen, and understanding that we know that it's going to take you time to come to terms with that.
All right. Well, anybody who, again, thinks that they are in one of these situations, don't hesitate to give us a call. We will connect you with Attorney Natale. Everything, any inquiry that comes into our office or directly to you, is completely confidential. So your name is not going to end up being publicized by contacting us. And sometimes, a lot of the value, obviously there's ongoing lawsuits with these, which typically end in some sort of compensation. But as difficult and as heavy as some of these topics are, sometimes I think that the value is being able, in some sort of story, in some sort of version, to be able to tell your story from somebody who's actually there to listen and be there. So, that is certainly an option here. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time on what I imagine is a very busy Monday morning to speak with me and to speak with the viewers here. Hopefully this was helpful, at least in understanding ways in which are not, necessarily what I deal with every day, but in which victims of crimes can be at least attempted to make whole. I mean, we deal with this all the time, where is there really an amount of money that is going to make you whole? Well, nothing's ever going to make what you went through, whether it be this type of abuse or other sort of injury or anything. Turning back the clock is really impossible from that type of situation. So yeah, as always, we do these on Monday mornings. If you have a question that is just something that you want addressed here, kind of like what we talked about today, stepping out of my personal comfort zone to get into a new topic, dropping an email to info@bowerslawmd.com, as you can see above. Put podcast question in the subject line. That way I know exactly what I'm looking at and can filter those appropriately. If it's something I can talk about, I'm going to talk about it on a future episode. If it's something that I need to bring an expert or somebody with specific experience, like Attorney Natale, I will absolutely do that as well. Frank, any closing thoughts for the listeners before we get back to our days?
Yeah, again, just feel free to contact Jobeth's office or us directly, and we'll be happy to help you out. Thank you, Jobeth, again for giving me this opportunity, and I'm happy to come back again in the future at your request or your viewers' request to give an update, on where things go. One last thing I wanted to mention, just for the viewers, like anything in the state of Maryland, we are going to be challenged with the bad actors who are going to try to undo the good things that the Maryland State Legislature did. So we're going to keep fighting this fight and make sure that you have your right to put your case forward and to get compensated. So thank you all for this time. Thank you, Jobeth, for giving me the platform to talk about this important issue.
And like I said, thanks for joining us. I think this is valuable information to have, and it's certainly, as evidenced by me bringing you here, not something that I have an area of expertise on. So yeah, thanks everybody for checking out this episode, and hopefully you'll subscribe and check out all of the episodes in the future. And again, keep bringing us questions that may branch out to new topics like this one that we can address, because sometimes, even if we just reach one person and they can get the help that they need, that they didn't know was available to them, then we have done what I kind of set out here to do. So again, thank you all. Have a great week, and we will see you next time.